can creativity fuel our faith and vice versa? I'm Tina Yeager, licensed therapist and life coach, host of Flourish-Meant podcast, and I'm coming to answer that question. Make sure that you listen all the way to the end. You're in for a treat. Today, I have Desmond Denton, who's an international motivational speaker, but even more than that, he is co-founder of A Story Studios. He's an author, a filmmaker, and he has just started creating this amazing project, among many others, brilliant visuals, talking about the lives of artists and how faith connects them with their creator and vice versa with their art. So Desmond, I am excited about this topic today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's dive into the intersection between struggle and pain and healing in the place of art. As you are looking through the lives of people who are artists, who are creators, how do you see pain and struggle coming out and yet also healing?
I think what's interesting with art is that our pain becomes part of our story, but you can very easily get trapped there. Even a lot of Christians, a lot of people, you listen to them and they become a victim to a specific story of pain. I've been through, and I'm not saying place it away, but what's interesting about art is we've got an outlet, whether it is we're expressing in music or we're creating a film, whether it's in a fantasy world or a real world. So I think it's inevitable in art that pain is part of the process. I mean, for some artists, even just surviving and making money could be a painful process. And it's learning, how do you use your skill? How do you use your craft to be a thriving artist? And that's a whole podcast on its own. But it's really exciting when you can tap into the depth of your own story, of your community, and see what is the hurt there? What is the pain points? How do I use that to take the characters, for example, in film, on a journey? So it's not just the preaching you're putting in, throwing on in the movie, that you're really taking people through a process of healing in the story. You see a person, you can take any story, the act structures, and you see a character at a specific place going on a journey where they discover something about themselves and the world, coming back with something they've learned. So there is a metamorphosis in how we create stories, even in art. You have something inside of you that you want to portray, or even if it is, for example, a commission. Someone asks you to paint a portrait. There's always something of yourself that goes into that. So yeah, I think it's completely part of the process. Healing, I think, for me, thinking a lot about my own story before we moved to the US, we had a long process of what is that story we'll tell people about coming from South Africa. And that was long before all the politics and things that happened between South Africa and America recently. We moved over on a green card extraordinary ability as a filmmaker. And it was just interesting to think deep about it before we came about what is that story when people ask us, why did we come here? What is the stories and things we bring with? So very healing. And in that process also, we came over and a few months later, COVID lockdown, can't see the family, can't see anybody. So finding a sense of community is quite difficult when you are locked inside your own home. And we started a documentary that it wasn't originally intended. It was just, I wrote a letter to my parents over Christmas time saying, hey, I miss you guys. And a lot of well-known South Africans and people started interacting and saying, well, there's a need, let's call it a pain, about missing home, missing where you grew up, missing your food, your culture, your people, your nature, even your religious environment. So we made a documentary called The Journey Home about how people make home away from home that really takes people through this process.
So art in all of its different forms, so many different forms, as we talked about in our last segment, that can help people resonate with where they are so they relate better to one another, but it also connects us with our creator. So we then resonate with who God is in that space. How can people with faith bring more of the hope into that story and the outcomes of the art so that they're directing it in a different direction? Not all art is hopeful, but if with faith, you can direct it that way, correct?
Yeah, you can. I think it's one of those things. So a lot of times when I look at, I don't want to say faith-based stories because it always gets a bad bashing. But you look at some Christian films, as I have to put it into two parts. The one is you look at it as art and say, listen, does it do the purpose it's made for? So yes, if it's made, for example, working with homeless people, showing a story about a homeless man and his journey, that's great. If it's made for entertainment, it needs to firstly be good entertainment. So the message of hope that we sometimes snap on gets sometimes plastered and put too heavy. So when you look at the story, you feel like, yes, it spoke to my heart, but it doesn't speak to me in depth. Like you can look at a beautiful painting, you can look at a beautiful sunrise, and it speaks to you. And sometimes doesn't need any words. And a lot of times, like Christian art, not just films, music, things becomes very elaborative in the teaching, in the pushing hope. But hope is sometimes very simple. It can be in the simplest form. It can be in the form of a hug. It can be in the form of just listening to someone. So I think in art, it's really finding what is those small ways that you can really do your art to the highest degree and bringing in a sense of hope. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's bigger. Whether you're doing something like Chosen or those projects that really engage people, or as, for example, a short film that I've done that speaks, it's called Letter to My Unborn Daughter, which deals all about a woman who had an abortion when she was very young and how she wrote a letter. And it was touching, heartfelt. So it speaks through brokenness to hope. But the way that we did that was taking in a lot of consideration about the person whose personal story it was and people going through that. So I think that it's a really multifaceted answer. In every form of art, it will be different. How do you bring hope into your art? I think it starts with how do you bring hope into your life as an artist before it comes into art.
So balancing the truth and the grace, the love, the not glossing over it, but keeping it in an authentic rendition of where we seek to connect with one another and authentically acknowledge where our pain and our suffering is and what we need to do in our next steps to keep moving forward and persisting.
Yeah, and just making sure that it fits the format. So, like I said, if it is a film that's made for charity, if it's made for church, that will look different than a film that, for example, goes to cinema. Um, the same as you get different churches, you go into different churches and the interiors are vastly different. So I think it's understanding what is the purpose and what is the format in which it's best to deliver.
What would you like to say to the audience about the intersection between the faith of these artists that you followed and the outcomes of their art and the way that they practice it?
I think that's been the most exciting journey is really just to getting to know these people, their families, and they're vastly different. So, for example, when I traveled to Norway and I was able to meet some of these people that follows what we call Olofsmen, the king of Norway, long ago was the first Christian who baptized and made the country become a Christian country. And you don't know these stories around the world, even as a Christian. And you get to know these people, you get to know the cultures, their food. I was dressed up as a Viking, even going to one of their special meetings, end-year functions. So it's really a honorable admiration, seeing the craft they do, how they build these boats. Or when would travel to Colombia, and you get to know the artist animator I've worked with there, and you see the details, you see the culture. It's for me, firstly, a big honor to be allowed inside someone's life, inside their family, inside the process of how they think. And I'm learning a lot through that. I'm learning a lot about how do they spend the day, because that's what the focus is a lot about, from the point where they wake up to how do they juggle family, finance. So I'm learning, and every artist is very different. Some of the artists will explain how they would sit in the early morning and just envision the whole day before they run and jump into the tasks and the demands of the day. And that might be an hour for some people more. And people have very different habits, very different ways. Some people only wake up at 11 in the morning, but they work till 2 o'clock in the morning. So very different structures. Artists don't have the 8 to 5 daily life. So their lives looks really different. And it's interesting to really show that. It's interesting to visually portray these lives, for example, the artist I went to film in Ireland, when I went to meet and travel to Game of Thrones studios, when I went to travel across the landscapes where these stories are made. So it's for me just firstly an honor to be allowed in, secondly to see the rhythms. And I think each story will show people a lot about that. I've learned something in every episode that I take home and try and apply it.
Such a fascinating exploration of different people's testimonies and lives and the way that they live out their gifts. I've seen a lot of places that will dismiss art, including some of our educational institutions, as a luxury or an afterthought, maybe. Can you talk about how art is really critical to who we are and our humanness?
I think it's where I've seen when art comes in. I'll give this example. We went to film in a community in South Africa, in the northern part of South Africa. And when we had the opportunity to choose between two universities, two well-known university towns, a little bit like Oxford in a way, is these towns, well-known towns that is based around a university. It was really a thing of they understood, the heads of the universities, that when the film comes to town, it really transformed the whole community because people see this film like a Home Alone movie. People want to travel to specific places to relive those settings, like Forrest Gump and Savannah. You travel to these places. So movies has a way to, in the making, transform a community. You bring in craftsmen, you bring in food, you bring in, and that's one example in the making, but also after. And in the same way, I think wherever they always say like, what difference does church make? And they say, well, pull church out of the picture, like remove them in that community and see what is the hole it leaves. So I love that idea of seeing like in the community, what's the shoes that the church fill, and how does art transform a community? So whether it is you driving and you're seeing beautiful murals and you're driving through a town, or the way that structures and homes and gardens comes together. I've recently traveled to Russia, Moscow, and just how they beautify this city throughout summer. And you walk there and you feel like, wow, this is welcoming. This is incredible. This is how they showcase elements of their nature, of their community in such beautiful ways. And coming from Africa, having seen many parts of the world, I really feel in every segment of life. So whether it is tourism, whether it's a business or office that you enter, whether it is the way we dress, art can kind of come into each of these, and it's definitely very transformational.
Desmond, how can people stay connected with you and see all of the amazing, visually striking films that you have to offer with A Story Studios and the new things that you're bringing out as a producer and director?
Yes, so the easiest personally to get in touch with me is just my Instagram, Director Des. So director in the first part of my name, or go to my website, Desmond Denton. I'll keep on sharing information as we go about this series.
I hope that all of you listening were inspired to embrace art and seek it out for yourselves so that you can fulfill the best of who you are in connection with your creator. And of course, I also hope that you will come back for the next episode of Flourishment.